Hello, this is Frank Falvey with Frank's Musings. And to begin with, the first musing today is Martha's Vineyard. And I think it is absolutely spectacular, and the cat's meow, that immigrants got flown to Martha's Vineyard. It was a perfect idea, and maybe a political ploy, and maybe the person that thought of it is getting too much attention, but the idea of sending them to Martha's Vineyard is a conversation starter. The conversation has begun. For too long, immigration and what to do with people crossing our southern borders has been not on anyone's mind, anyone's agenda. And Martha's Vineyard is the perfect place that they should have gone to, the number of them, I don't know, 50 to 100 of them. And I really believe Charlie Baker has made a tremendous, terrible mistake by bringing them to Otis Air Force Base, the old Otis Air Force Base on the Cape. Martha's Vineyard has the housing. People aren't there anymore. You know, you probably could rent some housing very cheaply, or maybe even some of the immigrants from Venezuela could even take care of the houses and the grounds. It's a small enough group that employment, even though this is an off-season, there's many people looking for jobs, even on Martha's Vineyard. There's a lot of construction, a lot of building labor. People commute between the mainland and Martha's Vineyard because they can't afford to live on Martha's Vineyard. But I think this community, being not a very large community, a somewhat smaller community, certainly could have absorbed them, certainly could have used them, and certainly would have been a great demonstration not only for Massachusetts and that particular community, but set a precedence that I think needs to be followed. We need to begin to have people transported to smaller communities. Now, I realized that people like to be with ethnic people, and in other words, Franklin, Mass, when Italians began, or Sicilians began to come into Franklin, it was almost, you know, whoever got here first, from what village they came. Other people from the same village came, other relatives came, and that has been the tradition. You go to Lawrence, Massachusetts, you know, the Irish came, so people from the same county or Cork. Lawrence right now is pretty much either Dominican or Puerto Rican. But I believe, because my high school experience, my work experience, my experience says that the more diversity in culture, the more diversity in religion, the more diversity in thought, the better the community is going to be. And bringing these individuals to Martha's Vineyard, if they stayed there, I think could have been easily absorbed. They had the educational facilities all set up. And many smaller communities, I think, would be doing a lot of justice for themselves and for the immigrants that are coming across the border to be transported into these and assimilated into these communities. Let's talk about immigration for a moment. You know, in the 19th and 20th century, we had a lot of immigrants coming from European countries. We had a lot of immigrants coming from Baltic countries. But what was happening? We had diversity in language. We had diversity in religion. We had diversity in ethnic culture. And we even had, stone masons that may have gone to Berry, Vermont, and worked in quarries, stonemasons that worked building Newport. We had certain ethnic groups, the Irish laboring on railroads, building the Lawrence Dam, and they tended to be not a similar community. In the 1960s and 70s, we had a lot of Cuban refugees coming to America because of the situation in Cuba. And then kind of in the 70s and 80s, we've had more Caribbean, Haitians and more Caribbean countries. And then in the 80s and 90s, we've had many more Latin American countries coming to America. The problem with not problem, but the situation with the Caribbean in the Central American countries and now Venezuela is that basically they're of the same culture. They are Latinos, they are ethnic people from Central America, from Venezuela, from the Caribbean. They seem to have some similar culture, they seem to have some similar food, and there may be a few evangelical Protestants in there, but basically they are Roman Catholic. So we're not having the diversity that we've had before. If we need to look at an immigration policy that is much more open to having more Middle East, more African countries, particularly in the top of Africa, and more Asian countries sending refugees to the United States. And we need less of the border crossing that's happening. Right now, the Latino population is greater than the African American population. And it's growing and growing fast. And yet, we know nothing about what's happening to that Latino population. I hear that when the Central American people were coming from Nicaragua, Guatemala, Mexico, wherever, they have sponsors. They have people that they say they're going to go to. They give an address and supposedly, or really they may be going to that address and family. But there's no follow-up. There's no checking. There hasn't been any reports. I mean, we never hear about immigrants once they're here in this country and what's happening to them, how they're being assimilated. We hear a lot about young men in large groups coming. We don't know whether they're staying together, whether they're settling down, whether they're having families, or whether they're remaining single and in groups and where they're going to. It's interesting that African Americans are really up in arms about police shooting them and killing them, which they should be. But have you ever heard of the police shooting or killing a person from Latin America or a Latino ethnic background? I mean, it's got to be happening. I mean, I imagine that the police are shooting people that are in robberies or in some illegal activities, and yet we never hear about it. Why? Why aren't even African Americans pointing out if there's injustice within the Latin community? Why aren't they saying these people are important, that they're humans too? Why is there such a blanket silence on this growing huge population? And why is there such a overwhelmingly migration happening over our border? I mean, if a terrorist wants to come to the United States from the Middle East, I think his best route is just to come to Mexico and just cross the border. I mean, we probably have too much emphasis on checking people coming in on airplanes and not enough emphasis on screening people that are coming over the border. If it's up to 2,000 people a day, I understand, in El Paso that are crossing the border. 2,000 people a day, you probably only can get their name, where they came from, and maybe where they're going, and possibly set up some sort of court date for them to have a hearing. The thing about Martha's Vineyard incident and about dropping, which I thought was wonderful, dropping people off in front of Pamela Harris's house, is that it has started the conversation. And we need to follow up on ideas. We need to follow up on how to solve this problem. We need to have a plan on what effect in 10 or 15 years is our allowing such huge, same type of individuals, same culture of people going to have on the United States. We're not at all dealing with it. And I think the people that are being left behind in El Paso, and I noticed that, once the people from El Paso or wherever came to Martha's Vineyard, all of a sudden the street people, the people that were living on the streets in El Paso, disappeared. They were housed or put up somewhere. But in these border cities and towns, there is probably the most, at least humane thing, or more of a problem, a humane problem of them being there and trying to find a living, trying to find food, trying to find a place to live, than sending the people to Martha's Vineyard. That was probably the more humane thing to do, was to send the people to Martha's Vineyard. So we have this security, we have this humanitarian situation in countries below our borders that we're not addressing. We don't have a plan. We don't know what's happening. I think China probably has more influence in Central America and than the United States does. We're not even attempting to solve the problems in the countries that people are coming from. So I think we need to begin not only a discussion, but we need to begin to seriously try to have some sort of resolve to this issue and some clarity on how we're going to resolve the issue. Well, I guess I'll speak on that more another time, but changing the subject. Brittney Griner, if I'm saying that right, Brittney Griner, a WNBA woman basketball player, all-star. She played for a team in Russia, a basketball team where she was maybe even more highly paid than the United States was paying her. She fully knew that this type of cannabis oil or whatever it was illegal to bring into Russia, yet she did it. She denied the fact that she did it. She certainly knew it was illegal. She didn't give a response that, yes, I did that. No, she said it didn't happen. And then she changed her mind and said, yes, it really did happen. I really brought that stuff across the border. Now, we want people to obey our laws. Why did we so suddenly jump on a bandwagon saying that she was being mistreated and we want the Russians to release her? We don't want people that break our laws, if they come from other countries, to immediately be released. She got special treatment by the press because she was a basketball star, she was African American, and she was married to another woman. And because of all of this together, the news media and women in the basketball area made out that she was being persecuted. If you're African American, you make a lot of money, you're a star, and you're married to another woman, does that elevate you to a realm of special treatment that the United States should have to give up a lot of diplomatic effort, should have to give up a lot of money or be compromised because this person made a stupid mistake? Let me point out, too, that the women that play basketball, right, if they really believe that she is being mistreated and Russia should immediately release her, why don't they just not play in Russia anymore? Why don't they, united as individuals, come out and say, this basketball season, we're not playing in Russia. We're not going to sign with Russian teams. We're not going to, even if we play with a European team, if that team has to play in Russia, we're not going to play. You know, let's put a little skin in the game. You know, I would look at this a lot more seriously if the women and the people that are making all the fuss would simply say, well, you know, we're not going to do this until you release them. I do agree with one thing, that the sentence of 9 years for this type of infraction is unfair. And the United States should, from a point of view of having that sentence reduced, having her treated humanely while she is serving the sentence, there should be a diplomatic effort to have her released, to have the sentence reduced, and have a humane treatment of her serving in prison. Bipartisan Safety Community Act is a joke. This is the gun act that people are saying is a bipartisan effort to reduce gun violence in schools. It's not. It has nothing to do with hardly any influence in reducing school violence. It isn't. I don't know why the Democrats ever agreed to such a watered-down, spend money, throw money at a problem that it's not going to solve the problem they're throwing money at. Maybe it will take care of some other stuff, but it has very little to do with guns. And, you know, we hear this on the news, this great thing, this great bipartisan effort. Let me tell you about this great bipartisan effort. And I'm reading from the bill, the actual bill, if you can find it, which is difficult because it was attached to another health care bill. Federal Clearinghouse on School Safety Evidence-Based Practices. The Clearinghouse shall serve as a federal resource to identify and publish online through schoolsafety.gov or any successor evidence-based practices for school safety by the states and local educational agencies, institutions of higher education, state and local law enforcement agencies, health professionals, and general public. In other words, they want to collect data on the best way to have school safety. If they haven't figured that out by now, okay, and if schools all over the country aren't implementing it, something's wrong. You know, you lock doors, okay, you have drills, you have procedures. You don't necessarily have a special police department in a school district. The police department probably should have the authority to encompass school safety and not have a separate department. So the Secretary of Education shall provide written notification of the publication of the Federal Clearinghouse on School Safety Evidence-Based Practices. So all the school districts throughout the country and states are going to send to the federal government clearinghouse ideas on school safety. They're going to publish a best practice handbook. What that has to do with preventing what's going on, I don't know. Other Department of Health and Human Service partners in the implementation of the evidence-based practice and recommendation of the clearinghouse. Just another way of gathering data. 1 year after the date of enactment of this act, the clearinghouse or the external advisory board established under Section 222 OD of the Security Act of 2002 to review grant programs and identify any grant programs that may be used to implement evidence-based practices and recommendations of the clearinghouse. In other words, they have no idea. They have no idea what to do or how to do it, and so they're suggesting you submit grant-based ideas and programs, and some of them they'll fund. Federal Bureau of Investigation salary and expenses, FBI, salary and expenses, for an additional amount for salaries and expenses, $100 million to remain available until expended to meet additional resource needs for the National Instant Crime Background Check System. In other words, there's this system that checks your criminal background. And so they're going to spend $100 million in improving that system. State and local law enforcement assistance for an additional amount for state and local law enforcement assistance, $1.4 billion to remain available until expended. And the date to expend this money goes through 2026. In other words, it's a 5-year program. And yet, you know, how they're going to spend the money or the purpose of it, right, is pretty vague. After this legislation was passed, then they will come up with ways of how to spend it. But here, $750 billion shall be awarded pursuant to a formula. $200 billion shall be for grants assisted by the Bureau of Justice Assistance for the purpose authorized under the Stop School Violence Act. Whatever the Stop School Violence Act is, they're going to get $200 million. And another $200 million shall be for grants. What type of grants is, I guess, up to the states, to upgrade criminal and mental health records for the National Instant Crime Background Check. You know, fine, if you want to update mental health records, but that isn't going to catch the types of individuals that have been committing school violence. It's just a way of gathering more data on mental health of individuals and criminal backgrounds, but it's not directed to the type of individual that is committing those crimes. Another $250 million shall be for community violence intervention and prevention initiatives. Well, I hope Franklin applies for some of this money, because preventive initiatives, you know, we probably could fund some basketball teams in the community here. We probably could provide for some school counselors, probably could provide for police officers, strictly handling and looking at juvenile cases. For an additional $800 billion for health surveillance programs and support, for $250 billion for grants for community health services, for $40 billion for the National Child Traumatic Stress Network, $240 billion for activities in service under Project Aware. I'm not aware of what Project Aware is aware of. And $190 billion for public health and social services. $600 billion for primary care training of the Public Health Service Act, to provide mental and behavioral health care training as part of the training of pediatrics and other primary care clinicians who plan to provide care for pediatric population and other vulnerable populations, such as victims of abuse and trauma and individuals with mental health and substance disorder. Well, that's money to train people that probably are already trained. If they haven't been trained, and money is going to new people to train in that field, it probably sounds pretty good. But $60 billion is a lot of money, and I don't see that preventing even one necessary school shooting or violence in the school that is ongoing. So that's from the Act. The final paragraph is $500 million shall be for carrying out school-based mental health service grants, and $500 million shall be for carrying out mental health service professional grants, in addition to other amounts available. Well, thank you for watching Frank's Musings. I hope it's been somewhat informative. Until I have a chance again to come and have the honor of talking before you, I thank you.
This program was made possible by your Franklin friends and neighbors, good folks just like you. Thanks for supporting Franklin TV. And thanks for watching.